Hey guys, in this video let's learn how to draft, cut and stitch this sleeveless fitted yoke dress with princess style line from square neckline, half circular skirt with side zipper. This fitted dress has a back high neck with waistline darts at the back and side zipper. Here is a list of measurements that I have used to make this dress, and the link to how to take measurements is given in the description box below. Here is how to calculate how much of fabric we need to make this dress. Here is a picture that explains how to calculate how much of fabric we need for making a half circular skirt. To make this dress, I have used a printed rayon of 2.75 meters and cotton lining of 1 meter. Let's begin with the back yoke drafting. We are going to draft the back pattern on paper. Make a fold of about 2 inches on one side of the paper as shown here. This fold line is considered as the on-fold side of the pattern for the back, and this fold also represents the center back of the back pattern. Leave about 2 inches from the top and square a line from the center back. This line is the HPS line. On this line, mark shoulder divided by 2. Square a line from this point downward. The person for whom I am making this dress has a drooped shoulder, so I am making the shoulder slope 1.25 inches. If you have a regular normal shoulder, you can go ahead and mark 3 by 4 inches to 1 inches. From the center back on the HPS line, mark back neck width divided by 2 or HPS to HPS divided by 2. Connect this point with the shoulder slope point to get the shoulder line. Remember that this person has a very sloping shoulders. So we are going to take half an inch first on the shoulder line inside, and then for sleeveless we are again going to mark a quarter inch inside. This step will help the shoulder line and armhole sit very well on the body. Now let's square the new armhole depth line from this point downward. Next step, let's mark a shoulder width of 3 inches on the shoulder line. Now let's mark the armhole depth on the original armhole depth line. I am marking the armhole depth using the formula bust divided by 6. Square a line to the center back as well as extend the line to the side. Now let's mark half of this armhole depth line. Square a line to the center back from this point. Now mark across back divided by 2 on this line. Now the across back point becomes insignificant because it is in between the two armhole depth lines. Next step, let's mark the bust circumference on the bust line. Here, since it's going to be a fitted dress, I am adding just 1 inches ease to the bust circumference. So it is bust circumference plus 1 inches ease divided by 4. Now from this point, let's square a line downward. Use a French curve to place on the armhole depth line that we marked inside to the bust line point that we just marked. Measure if the armhole measures armhole circumference plus half an inch ease divided by 2 as shown here. My armhole circumference measures perfectly, so I am proceeding to draw the armhole. If not, you can shift the armhole curve upward or downward to accommodate your perfect armhole circumference. Next, let's mark the back yoke length, which is 14 inches. Now let's square a line from this point. This line is our waistline. Since this is going to be a very fitted dress, I am going to add only 1.5 inches ease to the waistline circumference. So it's going to be waistline circumference plus 1.5 inches ease divided by 4 plus 1 inches of dart intake. Now let's mark bust point to bust point divided by 2 on the waistline. Mark the same on the bust line also and draw a line. Now on this line, let's measure shoulder to bust point as we would do for the front and mark a point. Mark a point on the side line also. Now mark the dart intake of 1/2 inch on either side of this line. Now measure 1 to 1.5 inches downward from the bust line and mark the darts. Next step is to join the side seam. Side seam has to be joined as shown here from the bust point that we marked on the side line, and we can blend the side shape. Now measure and mark 1/2 inches upward from the waistline. Use the softer side of the French curve or your pattern master or your hip curve and draw a line which is blended inside your waistline as shown here. Now let's draw the back neck. So from the shoulder width point marked, I want you to square a line inside to the center back as shown here. From this point, measure 1 inches downward and again square a line inside. Now you can place your armhole curve as shown here to draw the back neck. With this, we have completed the back yoke pattern. Now let's add seam allowances to all the lines. Shoulders 1/2 inch, armhole 1/4 inches. Since this is going to be a sleeveless, we are reducing the seam allowance to 1/4 inches. And side seam, you can add 1 inches to 1.5 inches. That is your choice. I am adding 1.25 inches here, 1/2 inch on the waistline and 1/4 inches again on the neckline. Now leave about an inch and then cut the bottom side of the paper pattern. Now fold one leg of the dart and place it over the other. This process is called truing. So we are going to fold the darts like this, and then yes, one side of the paper will lift. It's fine. Now if you can see, this is not a straight line on the waistline. So let's straighten this line as shown here. Let's start cutting with the folded darts. Do not open the dart and cut. This is called truing, so you need to close the darts and cut the waistline. Now continue to cut the rest of the back pattern. The back pattern is done and ready. Next, let's see how to draft the front yoke. Take another piece of paper, make a fold of about 1.5 to 2 inches fold for the on-fold line center front and place the back pattern as shown here. You can use pins to pin the back pattern to the piece of paper. Next step is to transfer the HPS line from the back pattern to the front pattern. So you can use a tracing wheel to do this step. You can see the wheel markings on the bottom layer of the paper. So just make a small mark as shown here, and let's mark the side seam line and the armhole depth line. Mark the length from the back yoke pattern. Now remove the back yoke pattern. Square the HPS line from the center front. Now let's start drafting the front yoke pattern. On the HPS line, mark shoulders divided by 2. Square a line from the mark point. Now let's draw the bust line cutting through the armhole depth line that we traced from the back pattern. Next, let's mark the length of the front yoke. I am adding half an inch to the back yoke length and marking 14.5 here. The front yoke length is longer than the back yoke length due to the body raise in the front. If the back yoke and front yoke length measure the same, after wearing, the yoke length tends to go up or ride up in the front. Now mark HPS to HPS divided by 2 or the back neck width divided by 2. Now mark a shoulder slope of 1.25 inches plus 1/8 inches for the front shoulder slope on the armhole depth line. Now join the HPS point and the shoulder point together to get the shoulder line. Now fold the tape and mark half of the armhole depth line as shown here. Square a line from this point to the center front. This is the across front line. On the across front line, mark across front divided by 2. Before drawing the armhole curve, we have to do shoulder adjustment according to the front neckline depth. I am marking 3/4 inches plus 1/4 inches from the shoulder point inside. We are adding 1/4 inches extra measurement to the shoulder adjustment because this is a sleeveless dress. We want the shoulder line to be slightly inside from the shoulder point. Now square a line inward from this point, and this will become the new armhole depth line from where we draw the armhole. Usually what we do is, after marking this line, we try to join the shoulder point with the across front point and draw the front armhole. But here we are not going to consider this point as the across front point, but we are going to mark 1/4 inches extra from the across front point that we already marked. This small step will help us have a better coverage around the armhole. To put it in simple words, for people who want a good coverage around the armhole, this is an important step to follow. Now complete drawing the armhole as we did for the back armhole curve. You can always measure the armhole curve before drawing and check if the armhole curve measures the same as the back or slightly, maybe 1/8 inches or 1/4 inches extra. Or you could adjust the French curve to get the perfect measurements. Now mark the shoulder width of 3 inches. Now mark the front neck depth from the HPS point, measuring 5 3/4 inches. Now let's complete the square neck for the sleeveless dress. Now on the waistline, let's mark waist circumference plus 1.5 inches ease divided by 4 plus 1.5 inches dart intake. Now mark the side seam joining the armhole line with the waistline. Now let's proceed with marking the darts. First, mark bust point to bust point divided by 2 on the waistline. Square a line upward from this point to the bust line. Measure and mark shoulder to bust point on this line. Mark the same on the side seam also. Usually the next step is to mark the dart intake on either side of this line as I am showing here, but we are going to mark 1.5 inches totally on one side of the dart. I am placing the dart slightly away from the center front. Why am I doing this? Because I want the princess line from the neckline. Now I am going to mark the total dart intake of 1.5 inches from this line towards the side seam. Now let's join this point with the bust point using a straight line. Now it's time to decide from where I want my princess line starting from the neckline. This will vary from person's measurements and the dart placement. So there are no specific measurements for me to give you from where you can start your princess style line from the neckline. So you have to decide for yourself where you want to start the princess style line. Only thing is the princess style line has to be blended with the dart leg that we drew. I know this is not a very easy call to make, but with practice you will be able to decide where you want the princess style line to start. Now place the French curve. I want a very mild curve and I don't want the princess style line to get too close to the center front. So I am picking a spot on the neckline and drawing my princess style line. I am connecting it with the dart point. Now blend this line to the dart leg. Now this is my princess style line. Now let's measure these two princess style lines and check if they measure the same. Now stand the tape and measure the princess line following one of the dart leg. Repeat the same for the other princess line. The point is to check if both the princess lines measure the same, because when we stitch them together they should align perfectly. Now one of the princess line is short. So I am extending the shorter princess line below the waistline as shown here. Now let's measure the side seam length from the back yoke pattern. Now mark the measurement on the side seam line. This will also be different for everyone according to their body measurements. Now let's draw the waistline by joining the side seam point with the dart leg on the waistline. And while drawing this line, use your French curve, the curve on the softer side. Now extend the other princess line to the point marked. Now place the armhole curve to draw a line from the center front to the princess style line. This becomes the center front panel's waistline. On the princess line, that is towards the center front, mark 2.5 inches from the dart point down below as shown here and place your French curve, making a slight curve inward between, that is in between the dart intake, and draw a curve. You can do this shaping for both the dart legs or the single dart leg, because this will add a little bit more bust room. Slightly shape the princess style line. Note that we will not be adding any seam allowance. Now let's cut the yoke part that has two panels, the center front panel and the side panel. Let's complete the front yoke pattern in the next video.